You do that. I mean, I'd just say welcome to everybody, but I think Narisa doesn't need any introduction, and belated happy birthday, and I'll pass it over to you, Narisa, and see how yes, the screen's come through nicely.
Can you see the full screen now or not, everyone?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I can. I can.
We can see it, but it's not on slideshow mode yet.
You have to go on slideshow.
Okay,
yeah.
I'll do that. Right. Okay, slideshow. Right. Okay. Right. So I called this talk "Exploring Old Bangkok" because originally I was going to do it in person for everyone, and it was to coincide with the launch of a book I just published. But obviously, COVID intervened, and so I'm going to try and take you on a little tour of the area in which I grew up in Bangkok for about 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And along the way show you some beautiful examples of Thai art and try and pinpoint some of the features that make Thai art so attractive and charming. So I chose this slide first of all because I just think it's really cute, you know, all the little animals, and this is a particular feature of Thai artists. They're very good at observing nature. They also like to fill every space. And I like these naughty squirrels. I don't know what they're going to get up to here. And then down here, we can see this symbol, which I want you to look out for throughout the talk, which is the granop, which is a particularly unique Thai symbol. It's a sort of root-like, flame-like symbol. So we can't really talk about Bangkok without first mentioning Ayutthaya, because I'm sure a lot of but Bangkok, yeah, and it was in existence for 400 years, from about 1350 to 1767. And if you look at this map here, you can see that Ayutthaya is up here. Now, this is a 17th century map, and if you come down river from Ayutthaya, you can see that in this red box that I've drawn here, Bangkok's already there. So although we talk about Bangkok as being founded in 1782, in fact, it was in existence in the 17th century, and in fact, it was the entry point really for ships that were going upriver to Ayutthaya to trade. They would stop off in Bangkok and go through all the customs facilities. In the 17th century and even in the 16th century, Ayutthaya was a huge city. It was, some people say, 1 million inhabitants. It was actually one of the biggest cities in the world, certainly one of the biggest in Asia. And it traded with everybody, with France, with the Dutch, with the British, primarily with the Chinese, the junk trade, and that was how the kings of Thailand made all their money, actually, by sending exotic forest products to China and then coming back with silk and porcelain and trading in these goods. And so they were so successful that, in fact, with France, for example, you can see here a picture of Louis XIV receiving the Siamese embassy to France in 1686. So at that time, it was really at the height of its powers. Then in 1767, it was finally for the second time. The Burmese actually attacked it once already in the 16th century, but this time after a long siege and allegedly through dastardly deeds on the inside, you know, betrayal from some of the king's men, it fell. And so below, I'm showing you a slide taken after the Second World War, actually, and in the SOAS collection of a huge monastery of Wat Pho Sanpet in Ayutthaya. So this was a huge national trauma. Obviously, the country was almost overrun completely. But as you probably know, in Asia at that time, when one's enemy attacked, they often just took people away. They took goods away. So they were more interested in people because the whole area is quite underpopulated. It's quite huge. So people away back to Burma, and they stripped the gold from the temples and they took all the jewels back. And in fact, even today, there are artifacts in Burma which were stolen from Ayutthaya at that time. On the bottom left here, I'm just showing you, whoops. Dee, can you go? That's Amazon, I think. Sorry. The trials of, on the bottom left here, this is a Burmese fort, which is on the Bangkok side of the river. And this is where Thonburi is. This is where King Thaksin escaped to after the fall of Ayutthaya. So he left the Ayutthaya, came down river here, and settled on this side of the river in Thonburi. But you can see that the Burmese were still there. So it was a very uncertain time, and his 15-year reign was full of fighting with the Burmese, having to go and subdue the Laotians, the Khmer, and everything else. And at his side was a very brilliant general, General Chakrabongse. And, you know, I'm sure if you read the history books, there are lots of different stories about why he finally organized the coup d'etat, but he did, and he took over. It was alleged that King Thaksin had gone mad. Whether that's true or not, the fact remains that Dapia Chakrabongse took over, and he founded Bangkok. So from Thonburi's side, which is over here, yeah, he moved the capital across this area here. And so this is north this way, this is south, and here we're looking south, and north is up here. And he decided there were various reasons that he moved the city to Bangkok. One, of course, was that the Burmese were still a threat, and having this river in between was much better. But also where King Thaksin had his palace up here was very, very cramped indeed. You can see this is Wat Arun. And so the area where his palace was, King Thaksin's palace, was very small and cramped. So he decided to move it across here. And in the space of about 30 years, he built a new city. And his great desire was, obviously, he had organized a coup d'etat, so he needed to legitimize himself. And so he decided that he would recreate the glory of Ayutthaya in Bangkok. And I live just around the corner here, and I've grown up in this whole area all my life. When I was little, all my friends at school felt very sorry for me because it was considered very, very unfashionable to live in the old part of town. But over the years, it's become very fashionable. And really, quite honestly, in this small area that we're going to look at today, and we're certainly not going to look at everything, so don't worry, are some of the finest sites and some of the most beautiful Thai art that you will ever see. So let's start with the Grand Palace, but I'm just going to tell you what we're going to look at. So we're going to look at the Grand Palace, the Temple of the Emerald Buddha in here. We're going to go to the National Museum, which used to be the front palace of the Deputy King. We're going to go to Wat Pho. Then we're going to look at two of my favorite temples, Wat Saket, Wat Pho, and then depending on the time, we will look at the Museum Siam, and then perhaps nip across the river to look at a few sites there. I mean, really, if you're going to explore this part of Bangkok, you need at least 3 days, I would say, to do it justice. So who were the people who ruled over Siam? And you've got to remember that the Grand Palace was actually the administrative and center of the whole country. So the king was the ruler, his concubines lived there, his ministers were there, but he was the absolute ruler. It was an absolute monarchy, and everything took place in the Grand Palace. Before the Grand Palace was built, in fact, it was the Chinese Quarter, and they were moved out, and some were pushed slightly further south to the area near my house, and some were pushed further into Chinatown. And how they built this large area, the Grand Palace, in a very short time, is they used labor from slaves, really, from Laotians or Khmer, who they captured and brought into Siam. So Priya Chakrabongse founded the Chakrabongse dynasty, and here I'm just showing you the symbol of the Chakrabongse dynasty. And I want you to remember that these two symbols are associated with Hindu gods, with Vishnu, the discus, the duck. Here we are, the duck, and the Dri, the Trisula, which is Shiva's trident. So at the heart of Thai kingship in this period were these symbols, and it was the history, long history of Brahmanism and how kings were revered at the top of the warrior caste. This was how the kings legitimized themselves. So it was Buddhism and Brahmanism. And even to this day, in many of the ceremonials, the ploughing ceremony or the coronation ceremony or the architectural symbolism, it's a lot of Hindu iconography. So here we see, I'm showing you King Mongkut because I love this photograph, taken by John Thompson in 1865. And you can see that on his head, he's wearing the great crown of victory, which is shown on the left here. And this tiered effect here symbolizes Mount Meru, which was the abode of the gods. And all through this lecture, I think you'll notice a lot of different iconographic elements which relate to Hindu iconography. So here, the throne, it's not exactly the same throne that he's sitting on, but it's very similar. Around here, you can see little yakshas, and then here you can see little Singh. And then all these ritual paraphernalia, the slippers and the sword that he's having here, these are all the coronation items of regalia. So while he was ruling, King Mongkut is much later, but King Rama I, who ruled for about 30 years, he still had to fight a lot of battles as well and administer the country. And he built a huge number of temples and palaces, all in a very short period of time. Now, before he seized power, he'd actually gone to Vientiane, and he'd come back. He'd sacked the capital of Laos, and he'd come back with the Emerald Buddha. And so very important symbolically, as the religious head of the country, was to install the Emerald Buddha in the Emerald Buddha temple. The Buddha isn't in fact made of emerald. I'm sure a lot of you have been to see it in the Grand Palace in the Emerald Buddha temple. It's actually made of jade, and its origins are a little bit obscure. There's been various debate about whether it comes from Sri Lanka or whether it's in typical northern Thai style. But what's interesting, I think, it was always regarded as extremely sacred. So in 1468, for example, it was in Lambang, and then it made a journey from Lambang to Luang Prabang, and then Luang Prabang to Vientiane, and then King Rama I, or Priyatakri as he was then, seized it and brought it with him back to Thonburi, and then when he became king, he enshrined it here. So notice again the imagery of Mount Meru in the Busabok, this throne that the Buddha sits in. So it's tiered to represent the 7 levels of the different levels of the different worlds. So that is also combining Buddhist imagery from the Jaipur with Brahmin imagery. And then here on the pediment, which is here on the main ubosod, you can see here detail. Whoops! You can see Vishnu on Garuda. And again, Garuda is the man to Vishnu, and Vishnu symbolizes the king. And you'll see this in any temple. So any temple you go to throughout Thailand, if you see this image of Vishnu on Garuda, you'll know that it's a royal temple. Then around the base of the Ubosot, you can see more Garudas. And anyone who's been to Angkor or Prekan will remember that there are Garudas around there. So this is imagery that dates back to Indian times, really, and then went via Cambodia and then is coming back to Thailand. But all this is to show that you're entering into a heavenly realm. Now, as part of this legitimization process, King Rama I, one could almost say he was obsessed, really, with the legend of Rama, the Ramakian, which is the Thai version of the Ramayana. And it's alleged that while he was going out battling the Burmese, he would, in the evening, just to while away the time, compose his own version of the Ramayana with his brother, who was his very close general. And when he created the Emerald Buddha temple, around the temple, he made a cloister telling the entire story of the Ramayana. And so here we see one of the demons, Mayurabh. In all, there are 178 panels telling the story. And I think the very interesting parallel between the story of Ramayana, and forgive me if you all know this story very well, but it tells of the triumph of good over evil, Rama, who's been exiled by his father and goes into the forest and is in exile for 14 years, and his wife is stolen from him by Ravana, the demon king from Lanka, and all the battles and travails he has to go through, assisted by Hanuman, the monkey king, to get Sita back. All this takes 14 years. And if you think about how long Thonburi was in existence, 15 years, I don't think it's a coincidence that this was the epic story that King Rama V first wished to use to link himself with Rama, who of course is Vishnu's avatar. So I think this is a very deliberate choice. And you'll see that in the beginning of the Chakri dynasty, images of Hanuman or images of Tosagan, the giants, and the monkey army, Rama and Sita are found throughout. And here we have one of the panels in which Rama has returned to Ayutthaya after his 14-year exile. And obviously these are murals painted on the walls of the cloister, and over the years they've been renovated. But I think the basic design has remained the same. And I think what's very nice is that you see the actual crenellated walls of the Grand Palace are reflected here. So around the this is very similar to a building we'll see in a moment, with the little Garudas here. This is exactly like the Dusit Mahaprasad throne hall, which we'll see in a minute. And here is Rama sitting here, and then here's Hanuman coming to pay homage after he's regained the kingdom for him, helped him regain the kingdom. And then here, just to show you that these sort of images of the monkeys and the demons, or here, for example, Indra on his three-headed elephant, Airavata, is also seen. And I think this is a very, very beautiful piece. And you can see that it's mother of pearl inlay on black lacquer, which is a particular feature of Thai art. And also note here that this is something that survived from the period of Ayutthaya. So when we're looking at the art of Bangkok, we are also seeing really a reflection of the art of Ayutthaya. But in this case, this is the piece that actually survived in Ayutthaya, because when Ayutthaya was sacked, some of the outlying temples still had scripture cabinets or had beautifully ornamented doors. And these were not destroyed by the Burmese because they just set fire to the main city, but they didn't completely destroy it. And so I just want to go through some of the imagery here with you, because I think it's particularly beautiful. And again, we see here the granok, which is this wonderful, very, very Thai device, and the trailing foliage. And here we see the little devatas, which you will also see in a minute, these angel-like beings who never have legs. They sort of come out of granok, and then they have their hands in prayer. And then down here we have singers, Thai lions coming out of granok as well. And again, this incredibly dense design, which is also very characteristic of Thai art. And here again, we have the granok, and here's a monkey battling, this is a demon battling with Rama. And then down here, I think this is particularly charming, the little figures in the round, which surround the base of a Tripitaka cabinet, a scripture cabinet in the Grand Palace. And how did people live in those days? Well, this is certainly not a typical dwelling, but it's where the king spent a lot of his time. And if you recall that building that I showed you on the murals, you can see that it's a similar cruciform building here. And all the elements of the architecture are full of symbolism. So along here, this roof barge here is the body of the Naga. And then these charfa, these are the heads of the Garuda. And then here are either the Garuda's wings or the scales of the Naga going up here. And again, we have this central spire, which represents Mount Meru. But here, interestingly, combined with a stupa-like, an elongated stupa shape. So this is the Buddhist symbol of Jedi and stupas that, you know, have been in Thailand since the time of Sukhothai, the time of Ayutthaya. Inside, it's very simple. This is in fact where the lying in state of King Rama IX and all the previous kings would take place in here. And it's very plain but very beautiful. So there's the mother of pearl throne, which is, you can't really see it here, but round here all the little typical guardians. There'll be the Garudas, the lions, the devatas, and then on the wall, this is hand painted symbols of Tepanom, the Devatas with their hands in prayer, and above the throne of the king, this 9-tiered umbrella, the Chat. And so this, you can tell this is the king. He always has 9 tiers, and then everyone else has 7 or 5, or sometimes just a simple umbrella. So the furniture that would have been found in these palaces, and forgive me if I'm talking about palaces all the time, but one of the reasons this is the case is because these are the things that have survived on the whole. Thai domestic architecture was wooden and rattan, and it was bamboo, split bamboo, maybe with a pandana thatch roof. But the things that have come down to us are these more durable things, because you have to remember that the climate in Thailand is very bad. It's a monsoon climate. And so lacquer is a very good thing that survives. And I've chosen this one to show you now in the National Museum because it has these figures of foreigners on them, which some people have said this is meant to represent Louis XIV. But it obviously represents a Westerner. And here's a Muslim trader. And then on the right, we have one of the wooden buildings that I'm showing you, the interior of Tamnak Dang, which was something that King Rama I built for his sister, actually. And the great thing about Thai architecture is you can take it down and put it together again. These panels can be dismantled and these columns can be moved. And it's moved several times. It's now come back to reside in the National Museum. And behind, we have a very beautiful bed, which is in Chinese style. And I want you to remember this too, that Chinese influence is also very strong in the art of Bangkok, because Chinese traders had been trading already with Ayutthaya, and a lot of the beds and some of the furniture is very markedly Chinese in its style. So at that time, during the first 5 reigns of the Chakri dynasty until 1885, there was always a deputy king. And you've got to remember, I mentioned the threat of the Burmese was ongoing, so the king would have to go and fight battles from time to time. And so there was always a deputy king, and he lived in that area. I don't want to flip back to the map because it will take too long, but the area across Sanam Luang, the central sort of field. And he had a palace almost as fine as that of King Rama I. And while King Rama I had the Emerald Buddha, in the Puthai Sawan throne hall, you have the Paputta Sahing, which is here, which is a beautiful image also brought down from the north. And I think there was a belief that northern images had a particular power. And these were sort of the palladiums of state, or the palladium of that king, the most important thing for them. And I also like this interior very much because it again shows us what the art of Ayutthaya might have looked like. You know, this wooden coffered ceiling in red and gold, and then the rows, alternating rows of Tepanom on black and Tepanom on red. And then around the walls, very beautiful murals. At the back, behind the Buddha image, there's some lovely cabinets with the Ramakian scene on it, and I'm showing you that in the bottom right. And above is the throne that the deputy king sat on. So you can see that in every way, his life was as grand as the king. And I think later in the reign of King Rama V, he didn't like this at all. He didn't want to have a deputy king. The museum's recently been renovated and it's looking stunning again. If only we could see it. I'm afraid we can only see it virtually at the moment. So I'm just showing you a few highlights from there, and the very famous inscription number 1, which some scholars have said is a fake done by King Rama IV, but I think on the whole most people don't believe that. This was found at Sukhothai by King Rama IV, and it recounts the history of Sukhothai, the famous tale of how, you know, life is good. In the fields there's rice, in the water there are fish, and anyone who has a grievance can come and see the king. And so this is a 13th century stele. And then in the middle we have a very beautiful Buddha under Naga, which is very typical of the late Khmer period. And so I just want you to remember too that in the 13th century the Khmer Empire stretched right across Siam as far as the current-day Burmese border. So Mueang Sing in the west of Thailand is as far as the Khmer Empire went. So the whole area of Sukhothai, central Thailand, was all Khmer. And then on the right, we have a standing Buddha in the Abhaya Mudra. And you'll notice that he's fully adorned. So he has a lot of regalia and his crown is very lavish, unlike earlier Buddha images. And so this is a style that will continue throughout the Bangkok period, be very ornate. And then I'm just showing a few smaller items. One is in fact in the V&A. So now the V&A is open again. You could go and see this. Again, a very beautiful lacquer and mother of pearl offering box in which to give food to the monks. And it's red and black lacquer with mother of pearl. And then a folding book with some diagrams about how to fight battles. And the paper is, the mulberry paper is covered with charcoal, and then the drawing is done in white. And then a rather simple but very lovely lacquer mother of pearl bowl. Now, second in importance after the Grand Palace and next to it, so if you try and imagine the map again, to the south of the Grand Palace was Wat Pho, and this was the largest and most lavish temple in Bangkok. And it was obviously, I think there was a temple here from the earliest time, not earliest times, but the 15th century, while Bangkok was an important trading post, but nothing like it became. But King Rama I wanted to rebuild it, and he did it in rather a hurry. And what I think is quite interesting here is you can see that in the fourth reign, because this is King Mongkut being brought here on his palanquin, you can see that parts of the temple looking quite dilapidated. And where he's going to get off the palanquin here, they've obviously just done a quick paint job on this to make it look smart. This has been coloured by a friend of Paisan in Bangkok. But, you know, we know the colour of all these porcelain, and from there we could work out all the different colours. This is very typical of a renovation that was made in the third reign. That's the between about 1824 to 1845. And so there's quite a bit of Chinese influence here in the architecture. But I think this is a wonderful photograph. You can see that because it was a glass negative, it took quite a long time to expose it, and things that they were carrying here have blurred. And then some people are turning around to look at the photographer. Other people are just staying very still, obviously very frightened probably to see the king, you know, because it was considered that you shouldn't really look at the king. Then inside, I just want to, because I think I'm quite obsessed with the Ramakian representation too, but these are some of the most amazing mother of pearl doors ever created. And the whole of the central part of the Ramayana epic is depicted on these doors. And I think it's just fantastic. I mean, if you look at the movement here of Hanuman fighting and the way that the mother of pearl is being used, or if you look at the way the vegetation has been portrayed, this is quite Chinese, but look at the lovely birds sitting in the trees, and here's the ganok, the flower, even the fire. When you light a campfire in Thailand, it comes out as a ganok. And here you can see, which is also interesting, I think, it's not perhaps very easy to see, but these are images of foreigners here. So I think one of the great things about Thai art is they have a very keen eye. They observe things, and there's always a lot of humor and lightness, I think, in Thai art. So when we all manage to get back to Thailand again, please go to Wat Pho and really look at these doors. They are an absolute masterpiece. Just look here, there's a man, can you see this chap here? He's got a little bowler hat on, so he's clearly a foreigner. So, and this chap too, here. It's an absolute joy, this piece. Then, really, Wat Pho was King Rama III, who was probably one of the most successful junk traders of them all and amassed a lot of money from junk trading. And remember that the king, all the money went to the king. Everything that came in or out of the country was taxed by the king. And so they became very wealthy. He wanted Wat Pho to be a university, really, and it can be said that it's Thailand's first university. So in pavilions all around the Ubosot and the Wihan, the two main halls, he had little pavilions with various murals and marble plaques giving the history of various folkloric customs or medicine or folk tales or science, various scientific discoveries, and this is one of them here. And they've actually been inscribed by UNESCO into the world's intangible memories. And then down here, I'm just showing a detail of a diagram for Thai traditional medicine. And then here, there's this wonderful tiger who I think is just gorgeous. I don't actually know what the tiger's doing, but I mean, tiger skin was obviously associated with rishis in the past, and whether this tiger has some mythical powers, I'm not sure. And then I included this little picture at the bottom because one of the great joys of living near Wat Pho is that at night to go and wander around, and it's completely magical at night time, and there's no tourists at all hardly. When King Rama I established Wat Pho, he asked people to go out and collect Buddha images from all over the country and gather them here in Wat Pho. And so another very interesting thing is to wander around and just look randomly at the Buddha images. And here, there are 1,000 altogether. And here I'm just showing you some of them. So I think it's quite a classic photograph, but it's I think it's very striking. Now behind Wat Pho, if one goes out of the East Gate and just goes through a little park, you come to this very much later temple, but very charming temple, which again is well worth a visit because it's not too busy. It's on the side of a canal just outside the actual central part of the old city. And what I think is fascinating is it was inspired, the interior, which you can see as a sort of neo-Gothic style, was inspired by King Chulalongkorn's visit to Europe in 1897, so it's in Gothic style. And then in the cemetery, where there are various mausolea housing the ashes of the descendants of King Rama V, some of them are in all kinds of different styles, very eclectic. And then the walls of the main Wihan and also the Ubosot are clad in these Benjerong tiles. And I'm just showing you a detail here. And Benjerong ware is another porcelain which is considered typically Thai, but actually was made in China. But again, has all the motifs. But I think it's very nice because the motifs are often portrayed in quite a naive way because the Chinese artisans didn't quite get it right. So the designs were obviously sent out by Thai artists, and then the Chinese artisans replicated them. So this is a Guinea, half woman, half man, but she's come out looking slightly cartoonish. And then here are the Teopanom again. So I'm calling this neo-Gothic meets Chinese porcelain. And then if you leave, again, go out by the east door of Wat Saket, then you come to Wat Saket, which is surely one of the most imposing and beautiful temples in Bangkok. Again, this was begun by King Rama I, but not finished until almost the end of his reign. There are 28 granite Chinese pagodas all round. These represent the 28 previous Buddhas. And what I like inside is this Buddha image. In front, although it's a little bit difficult to see here, there are a lot of plastered disciples, which is very unusual. So instead of being able to get really close to the Buddha image, in front of him, there's about 80 disciples, sitting there. And it's quite spooky, actually, if you're not expecting it. And then also, interestingly, behind one of the images, not this one, but another one, is this beautiful Dvaravati panel, which dates to about the 8th century, and lovely murals. So this, again, I would highly recommend this. If you want to spend an afternoon wandering around old Bangkok, just to do those two temples is absolutely perfect. Now, if you've had enough of temples, something's happened to this picture here, but never mind. If you've had enough of temples and want to have a bit of fun, you should pop into the Museum Siam. This was opened about 15 years ago, and it's in the old Ministry of Commerce building. And it looks at being Thai in a different way. So it deconstructs what it means to be Thai, really. And so you can see this huge figure on the right is the Nang Quack, and it's enormous. I mean, it's far bigger than this room. It's about, I don't know, 10 meters high. And it's a very playful display inside, which changes every 2 or 3 years. So I would say that this is also well worth a visit. And very often there may be a fair going on there. I even hold my Bangkok Edge Festival there. And so it's very lively indeed. I'm sorry about this picture here. I don't know what's happened to it. It was a picture of me standing inside the new underground, because what has been a game changer, as everyone likes to say in government now, what has been a game changer for this whole area of Bangkok is the tube, because it comes up actually in the grounds just here, in fact. Here is the entrance to the tube, Sanam Thai tube. And the tube station itself, I'm really sorry about this picture, is magnificent. It's like a little palace in its own right, with beautiful columns and gold and a wooden roof and everything else. It's a bit like one of the metro stations in Russia. And then you can come out there, and then right behind is Wat Pho, and then this is Maharat Road. And I'm just showing you this to show that this has become very trendy, and my house is just down here. Some of the people have been to my house, they have walked along this road, and now all these old shops that used to sell traditional Chinese medicine are now selling coffee and ice cream and sort of pad thai. But behind is still the dried fish market, and so you can see there are sort of 50 different sizes of dried prawn that you can buy, or 10 different types of mackerel. And here you can still get the old massage oils, and if you want a massage, I mean, you can still get one. And that again is a very good thing to do. If you've had a heavy day sightseeing, why not have a massage at the end of the day and take some massage oil back home? So I think we've got time to nip across the river, just in case anyone wants to ask any questions. But behind that street I showed you just now is the river. The Manam Dapaya, always miscalled on European maps as the Manam, which means the river, the river Manam, because Manam means river. It's in fact called Dapaya, which is the River of Kings. And at the end, I'm just going to show you the map again quickly. But along there's also just been opened a footbridge going across from Baklong Dalad, which is the fresh flower market. You can walk across the river on a sort of garden bridge, and you come first of all to Wat Pho, which is a beautiful temple with this very high stupa that you can see from the river, and it's very what do you call it? Very like a real landmark. So you see, and what's really nice is if you look across from the Bangkok side, you can see Wat Pho, a Buddhist temple. And then you can see Santa Cruz, which is the Portuguese temple. And then you can see the Gian Un Geng shrine. You can't really see that, but if you go across, you will find it. And that is the shrine where the Hokkien traders, for hundreds of years, used to moor their junks and go and ask for safe passage. It's what's known as a joss house for the Chinese. And the Portuguese, as you also probably know, have been trading in Thailand longer than anyone else since the 16th century. And so around this area of Santa Cruz Church is an area called Gudi Jean, which they still have little houses selling Portuguese sweets. And there's a little museum in a wooden house telling the story of the Portuguese Siamese relationship. And then right in front of my house almost is Wat Galian Nimit, which was sponsored by a very wealthy Chinese merchant and then given to King Rama III. And this also features in John Thompson's photographs. And inside there's a massive Buddha image. And this is very popular with all the Chinese in Thailand who love to go and so we hate the monk there, the main abbot there. He's been a real vandal. He's been in lots of fights with the fine arts department because he's pulled down a lot of very beautiful old edifices in the grounds of his temple. But nevertheless, I mean, when you're going up and down the river, it looks very inspiring. And then, of course, the iconic Wat Arun, I couldn't resist putting a little photo taken from where I know many of you have come for dinner in the past, and looking out across Wat Arun, which is sort of, I always think of Wat Arun like our Tower of London or our Eiffel Tower. It's a sort of iconic building for Bangkok. And Wat Arun, of course, means Temple of the Dawn. And you may think, well, why is the sun setting there? But in fact, it's where King Baksin came and saw the dawn, and then it was called Wat Arun, so Temple of the Dawn. And so I think I'm going to stop there, because people may want to talk about things, and I just want to commend the book to you, if that's all right. And I think in these difficult times, if you're interested in exploring this further, you can look on Amazon and buy it on Amazon. Or if you leave it for a while, when things return to the new normal, or more normal than the current new normal, maybe you can come to the shop and get a copy from Chris or me in London. So now if anyone would like to ask any questions, I've got a couple more slides if anyone wants to see any more, but I think that's probably enough of me chatting away, and maybe people would like to talk about Bangkok. I think it was mentioned in the blurb about me that I was going to talk about how is Bangkok preparing for global warming, and I'm sorry to say not very well. And if you want to read novels about this, you can read Bangkok Waits for Rain, which talks about the threat from global warming, envisioned, how do you say that, vision, future where a lot of the buildings, the tall buildings that have all gone up and are making the city sink some more by their weight, they're all submerged underwater. So it's not a cheerful prospect, but okay. So I think that's enough now, and maybe everyone would like to join in and have some comments. Charlie?
Hi, sorry, I just unmuted myself and it took a while to
Yes.
to do that. Yeah, if anybody has any comments, because there's quite a lot of us, you can use the raise hand symbol, which should just be down at the bottom of your screen. You can raise your hand, or I'll put you all on grid view and you could physically raise your hand if you'd like, but you're stretched across 2 screens, so I may have to search for you. But does anyone have any questions for Narisa? Okay, I've got Sarah Kellen, yeah.
Hiya. Sorry, I was just fascinated to hear about this underground. I didn't realise that had happened. And you're talking about the problems of tall buildings and so on. How have they overcome the engineering problems of creating an underground system underneath Bangkok?
I know, it's a bit alarming, isn't it? But actually, I mean, I think, you know, engineering feats, they've gone right under the river too with the underground. And it's absolutely fantastic. And for me, because you know how bad the traffic is in Bangkok, for me, it's really changed my life, because I can just walk out of my house and go to the Museum Siam, jump on the tube, and we're off. And also, of course, unlike the London underground, which is very hot in summer, it's very cool and it's very clean and it's very, you know, magnificent. And they've done some other themed stations as well. They've done in Chinatown, they've done a beautiful themed Chinese style station. And so it's been a huge success, and it actually goes a long way. I think you can go all the way to Duck Market. And so in the past, when people said about, you know, I have a small hotel, and they say, oh, I don't want to come and stay there because I can't get anywhere. But actually, that's not true anymore. So it's really changed the area in terms of people going out and going to a nice cafe or a restaurant or something like that. But, you know, the engineering, a lot of it was done by German tunnel boring equipment. So when I heard that, I was rather relieved, I think.
Thank you.
used for the temples.
Oh, I don't know.
Do you have a question, Hilary?
Well, Philip was just saying, are the temples still in use for prayer and devotion?
Yes.
They're not
Yes,
just
yes.
museums. Yeah.
Not at all. No, they're very much. I should have said that. Thank you for asking that. They're very much in use, and it's actually quite nice to go at 5 o'clock to Wat Pho or to Wat Saket, and they have prayers at 5 in the evening and chanting. And so quite a lot of foreigners do like to go and hear it because it's very soothing. And then on special days, Buddhist holy days, they have special prayers. And so people can go in at any time and make an offering or sit and meditate or whatever they want to do. And often, I mean, for example, I showed, had the pagodas all around it. It's so quiet and it's lovely to go there and just walk around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Walks that I suggest because I have a 3-hour walk and it's beautiful.
I'm sure it is. It must be gorgeous. But is the population fairly observant? And what's the situation with the young?
I think on holy days, they're not very observant. I mean, it's an interesting question. I think people like to make merit. So it's sort of, studies have been done saying it's quite a sort of materialistic form where if you give food to the monks, you will accrue merit, or if you build a stupa, you will accrue merit, and that sort of thing. Right. And so on one's birthday, for example, people like to get up, because as you probably know, monks can't go out shopping to buy food or anything. They have to be given their food. So every morning there's an alms round. And so I think there were some quite fun pictures during the pandemic when people were wearing PPE. The monks are wearing PPE, the donors are wearing PPE, and they're sort of stretching their hand out like that, right into the arm bowl at a distance. So they are quite observant, to say, yes. I think people grow up in karma, and so if you do deeds in your life, you will, or in certain instances, that things that have happened in this life, the result of what you did in your last life. And in the past, people have said this is why Thais are quite sort of know their place and all that sort of thing. I don't think that, I mean, I think a lot of people are far less observant than they were.
Right.
And, a lot of it centered around the village, where the temple would be the school as well in the old days. And some of the temples, like Wat Pho, the one with the tiles, still has a temple school attached to it. So in the old days, with the 19th century, even the 20th century, to the temple school would be the boy education, and obviously girls.
Right.
Because
just the boys.
The monks cannot touch the woman at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
We had a question from G. You had your hand up. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a technical question. It's about the. You said the size of Ayutthaya was one of the largest cities in the world at the time. How does it compare with Europe and the size of Venice and Paris, those sorts of cities? Is it much smaller or bigger? Or?
I mean, I'm really not an expert on those cities, but I think it compares very well if you want a city to be large. It was very, very large. And Venice is perhaps more constrained by its size, although I mean, it's a good question, because in terms of the geographical constraints, I'd say they're quite similar in a way, because Ayutthaya was on an island with 2 rivers on either side. So, and how do people know how many people were there? I don't know. I think it's in Chinese annals. I mean, this is one of the very good sources that we have on Ayutthaya. And because it was such an important trading part, the Ming and the Ming dynastic annals record a lot of details about it. and they actually send all the weighing equipment for the traders, and so they send seals and all that sort of thing. So I assume that that's where the data comes from. But you're right, it's something I should look into further.
What's the size of Angkor, for instance, that sort of thing at the time, roughly? Does anyone know that?
Smaller, about 300,000, I
Claire,
think.
you've got your hand up. Do you know the answer?
Yes, I do know the answer, which is why I was.
Good.
It was, according to the participants to the first embassy by King Louis XIV, and the Comte de Forbin, who wrote extensively about his trip to Ayutthaya, it compared very favorably to Paris. He said it was approximately as big as Paris, but it had far more churches than Paris did. And in that, it was comparable to Venice. So it was approximately, yes, about 1 million inhabitants. And they were, everybody, all the French were very much surprised at the size of a city, which they imagined would be nothing but a little village. So yeah, as big as Paris, perhaps slightly smaller than London, but far more churches than Paris, far more temples, because they could not really tell the difference between churches and temples.
Great, thank you, thank you.
Got a question from Adrian. If you can unmute yourself.
Thanks. Who lives in the area now, apart from yourself, obviously? Has the demographic changed, or is it still people who've lived there for generations, or what? Is it?
Yes. Well, the area just north of me, towards the Grand Palace, is owned by the Crown Property Bureau, and so the tenants there were all asked to move out and then move back in again at a higher rent recently, because it was renovated. And I think a lot of us are quite anxious about what's going to happen, because there's certain changes, like Ta Chang, which is just outside the Grand Palace, used to be a public pier, and that public pier has been moved from there because it's now just going to be an exclusively royal pier. And so I think a lot of people are rather uneasy about what's going to happen. And so there aren't many private homes there. And, you know, when Dominic, my son, said to his colleague in the Navy, they wanted to take him home, he said, no, he didn't want to say where he lived or anything. He said, no, I'll just, and they said, well, let us drop you at your, just going to go to my home. He usually said, oh, I know who you I know, because there aren't many private houses. Chinese school and another sort of technical college who are real ruffians, and all the cafes get rather anxious when they come in. But there aren't a lot of private homes, and you're right. So I don't know. I mean, gentrification is an issue, I would say, a big issue, because, you know, community is very important, and I think the government doesn't really understand what people want to see. They think they want to go and buy the same old tat everywhere. You know, some horrible little brass elephant or something like that. And I think, you know, COVID in a way has made people perhaps reevaluate tourism a little bit, because before I think they were catering very much to Chinese tour companies. And then they have realized in the last few years that Chinese tour companies put a lot of money into the country, because they actually don't bring any money to the country. And they go and eat in Chinese-owned restaurants, and the money just stays in China. So that suffered a lot from tourism. All over, you know, volume of people going. And I've been to meetings about it, because in 2022 it's going to be 250 years since Bangkok was planned. And there's been a lot to make it a livable city, how to make it, because there's actually far less roads in the city. Percentage of roads, centre, it's not something like that. That the traffic is very bad. There aren't streets, and there's a lot of debate about making it really a livable city. And that area where I live, you know, and make. make for a livable city either. You know, one.
Thanks, Narisa. We've got one more question, I think, from Mike.
Yeah, I was quite interested in the trade up the river, because last summer I was in the museum in Utong in Suphanburi province, and there they've got a super exhibit of some Indian traders trading off the river, unloading stuff off, obviously not the Chao Phraya, but a tributary of the Chao Phraya, unloading beautiful, beautiful stuff, you know, at the quayside up there, in the way back in maybe 5th, 6th, 7th century, something like that. And I wonder if you can say anything about that. I wonder if you have any ideas about that, Narisa. Do you know anything about trading, early trading?
Yeah. One of the ways, you know, you can tell that there's been a lot of trade of finding coins and beads, and obviously in the peninsula further south, they found a lot of coins and beads, and then in Utong, they found gold artifacts very similar to those found in Ok Eo in the Mekong Delta. So quite clearly, back 2 millennia, really.
But the odd thing is that they had adjacent to this exhibit a map of what they thought was the extent of the sea area, and they were implying that towns like Suphanburi and Utong were actually on the coast in those days. That the sea was
correct. Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. Because the sea level was much higher at a certain point. So, I mean, if we're going to talk about global warming and sea level rise, it's something that, you know, does happen, has happened in the past. And a lot of people say that if you look at all those towns that have trading, evidence of trade, you know, much earlier on, that was because you're absolutely right, the sea went in much, and then the delta, you see, has extended because of the silt and the monsoon climate.
Sure, yes.
The delta, has created a delta over hundreds of years, and humans love to settle in delta areas because it's, you know, easy to build and everything else. There's fish and food and access to the sea, but it also makes it very vulnerable.
Yes.
People speculate that what will happen is that it will go back to its old extent.
I mean, has this change in sea level been proven?
Yes.
I mean, has it been shown by scientific means?
Yes. I mean, there's archaeological evidence. Yeah.
Right. Do you know where that is?
He's in Germany.
Well, I happen to have published a book called Early Thailand.
Really?
Yes. Also, there's another book called Early
Thailand.
It goes by. So
I'm sorry, you're breaking up a bit. I can't. It's a book called Early Thailand.
Yes, Early Thailand. If you send me an email, I'll send you all the references if you like.
I'll do that, certainly. Yes.
Yes.
Your email address is
Narisa Chakra. Narisa 1 R 1 S Chakra CHAKRA @gmail.com.
gmail.com.
You can also look on the River Books website as well, actually. It's on there. And it's actually on special offer in Bangkok at the moment.
Right.
Make it quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions at this stage?
In that area.
No, that seems to be it, Narisa. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Lovely to see some friends, old friends and new friends. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope we can all get back to Bangkok soon.
Yeah, very much hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
you.
Narisa. That was excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. You made me very homesick.
I know. And thank you for your contribution.
Thank
about
you.
Paris and
you.
Venice.
Thank you, Narisa. It was
Oh,
great.
wonderful.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Lovely to see you. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Narisa. Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you, Narisa.
Bye bye. Bye bye.